Cultural Marxism is a broad term to describe the adherents of critical theory and the metapolitical leftist influence in the political climate. Cultural Marxism is an ideology based on a Marxist analysis of power relations. Traditional economic Marxist theory is in a simplified way explained as a perspective where capitalism creates a society where the power relationship between upper class and working class are out of balance, which in turn creates social problems. Cultural Marxism, then, is taking this outlook of power relations and applying it to Western society and to the following areas: gender, male, female, family, nuclear family, alternative family, sexual orientation, heterosexual, gay, race, white, non-white, culture, Europeans, non-Europeans, or Swedish and non-Swedish, or Westerner or non-Westerner, religion, Christianity, atheism. They then set out to philosophically deconstruct and linguistically obfuscate old norms. Some argue that sex is real, but that gender is not, as an example of linguistic obfuscation. Some argue that sex is irrelevant as an example of philosophical deconstruction. But they both have the intent to deconstruct Western norms. This philosophy is brought into academic professions and is the incentive behind scientific works intended to back up the preconceived notion, but mostly desire that, for an example, sex differences are irrelevant, in order to deconstruct old norms and values. Oppressed and oppressor. The most oppressed human, according to this outlook then, would be a Negroid Muslim homosexual female with a severe handicap, whilst the privileged human is the white heterosexual Christian male. The cultural Marxist goes as far as to punish the latter for his privilege, and then sets out to label him an oppressor by default, regardless of his individual, previous and coming actions and desires. Economic Marxism, oversimplified, see power relationships, and then seek out to take money from the haves and give to the have-nots to redistribute wealth. Cultural Marxism, on the other hand, oversimplified, see power relationships, and then seek out to take social power from the haves and give to the have-nots to redistribute social power. What we end up with is a society that promotes non-white homosexual females as strong and good, whilst promoting white heterosexual males as weak and evil. Cultural Marxism uses critical theory to challenge norms and to change the culture for the benefit of the so-called oppressed groups. A tool is political correctness, which makes it politically correct to challenge norms and which reward being strongly in favor of the oppressed groups while demonizing or pathologizing people who oppose challenging Western norms and culture. The zeitgeist, therefore, changes in favor of feminism, multiculturalism, LGBTQ, atheism, and more. To criticize the white heterosexual Christian Swedish men, for example, in nuclear families, for being a too dull and too oppressive group is a common thought in the cultural Marxist left, and everyone who is influenced by it. Cultural Marxism is common in modern Western schools and in modern popular media. This is because cultural Marxism was intended to, for the most part, get spread uncritically via cultural means. In order to do that, they had to get into key positions of influence. Quote, the long march through the institutions, close quote, as Gramsci said, in order to control the culture and, in that way, influence the public. Cultural Marxism was a set of ideas that got introduced top to bottom instead of how cultures historically most of the time have gotten introduced, that is to say from the bottom up over long periods of time. The cultural change could not have been carried out abruptly because it was in a too stark contrast to what was then the existing culture. Therefore, cultural Marxism was, unlike Nazism for example, which was a cultural force more in line with what was then the existing culture, a cultural force that didn't officially present itself openly to the public like Nazism did. Instead, cultural Marxism rather sought to influence and finally change the culture over a long period of time, more systematically. Much because of this, cultural Marxism is common in modern Western schools and in modern popular media. There are even modern laws that defend cultural Marxist values at the expense of old Western values. Thusly, a great cultural change has been actualized and dissenting against it made illegal.
There would be many people who would say, what's wrong with showing a preference for your own race?
In some contexts, it's actually illegal to do so. In employment contexts, in college admissions.
100 metres up the road, PC Paul Hughes is keeping his eyes and ears peeled.
Right, you're under arrest. Grossly aggravated public order. Yeah, you start a gravel where it's there, but that's a racist song. I consider it to be racist.
The lad doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. PC Hughes begs to differ.
It's racist, I perceive it to be racist, so he said it's not, however, it's what I perceive it to be, so he's been arrested for a racial aggravated public order. When you apply for a job, you certainly can expect a criminal background check, a credit check, even a Google search. Here's a word of advice. An employer nowadays might do a background check on your social media activity, maybe looking back as far as 7 years. And Diana Zog explains how it works, how it could hold young men and women back long after they're mature.
Social intelligence is hired by companies to perform a social media background check. Facebook may come to mind first. Young people may think my profile is private. That helps, but the company says most information comes from in-depth searches on lesser-known sites. Instead, looking for criminal activity, sexually explicit photos, or racist remarks going back years.
It might be that you made some statements that perhaps were sarcastic and they don't get it, that they were sarcastic. They don't get it, that you didn't intend that. Or again, it could have been some phase that you were experimenting with.
And those things can come back to haunt you.
To haunt you badly.
The man claims he was attacked by a group of black youths.
Oh, right, I call them black bastards, because they are black bastards.
Well, no, you don't use language like that.
Niggers.
Hey, that'll do now, mate. Put your hands behind your back for me.
I'm arrested, yeah?
You're under arrest, mate, yeah. Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that, please. Hey, I told you, no more, right? No more. I don't want any more of that language, now keep it quiet, right? Shut up now!
I just tell you what it is.
I want you to keep your mouth shut, I don't want to hear that language. He's been arrested for racially aggravated Section 5, which is swearing in a public place and using racial language.
They waste no time in getting the racist idiot into the back of the van, where no one can hear his abusive language.
You are my side.
Control over language. In the cultural Marxist idea lies an attempt to define or redefine words and concepts in such a way that they serve a political purpose. By having a control over our everyday language, there is spread a remodeled idea of words and concepts in favor of the cultural Marxist viewpoint. Newspeak. For example, the concept of unaccompanied refugee children. In reality, a group of adult men with sufficient economic status to travel or be smuggled several hundred miles and who has been promised that the Swedish government will grant them generous contributions. To conceal the real causes of these men's presence in Sweden, there was constructed the concept of unaccompanied refugee children in order to give the Swedish general public a misleading mental image and impression that these are children who are refugees and who are alone. This serves the effect of softening the Swedes' heart, making them lower their guard, making them less prone to oppose this aspect of the immigration to their country. By constructing a newspeak, cultural Marxism takes control of society's language and hide, in a suggestive way, the real and underlying meaning of a word, and is thus spreading a desired but misleading picture of the reality. Ghettos gets translated into vulnerable areas. Ethnic and racial discrimination in the labor market gets translated into affirmative action. And economic discrimination gets translated into New Start zones. Multiracialism and multiculturalism, which originally were newspeak for immigration, are two words they consider have gotten too much negative associations ascribed to them, and thusly they've set out to change the concept again. And thus, multiracialism and multiculturalism gets translated into diversity and coexistence. Another example of cultural Marxist newspeak is when immigrants, without authorization, dispose their papers and then gets defined by cultural Marxists as undocumented. Cultural Marxism is heavily associated with the rise of political correctness and the victim industry that permeates the modern zeitgeist and orthodoxy in the current modern Occident. The power of language is a central part of the cultural Marxist means of control over individuals' daily lives, and newspeak is widely used in the media in order to consolidate power, not only the individual but also of representatives of the popularly elected assemblies. The Swedish TV channel TV4 in August 2nd, 2011 invited guests who declared the importance of having a control over the Swedish language. And they talked about the political advantage of having precedence in the media when the concepts are filled with content. They talked about how using words, meanings, and concepts that are not to their ideology's benefit is analogous of agreeing on about their opponent's premises, which thusly is negative for the cultural Marxist ideology. Therefore, they will try to avoid accepting words like mass immigration, or why not oikophobia and xenophilia, while championing words like Islamophobia and xenophobia.